This is the second part of this manhwa. If you haven't seen the previous chapters, I recommend that you do. Ri smiles at the protagonist and confuses him by saying that now he will see if he can heal his own wounds, meaning he was threatening him or trying to intimidate him. Meanwhile, Michael can't hide his happiness at seeing Yu again, the girl of his dreams, and the one he would fight tirelessly for to gain her attention. She sharply responds to him to get lost. Now the redhead, seemingly unashamed by Yu's cruel rejection, approaches his friend Wei and asks him what he was doing talking to the older brother Ri. Ri gets annoyed with him because he called him older brother and doesn't believe he has the trust or authority to do so. He then turns to finish his conversation with the protagonist and immediately asks if he would dare to compete against him. Wei shrinks back, to say the least, and begs Ri for his sincerest apologies, as he doesn't feel capable of competing against him. Michael interrupts the conversation and tries to encourage his friend to accept Ri's challenge and not be intimidated by him. Wei tells him that if he's so confident, he should be the one to face him. Ri now raises his voice and informs the protagonist without hesitation that even if he doesn't accept the challenge, he will use him as a punching bag and beat him regardless of the damage to his reputation. This leaves Wei with no opportunity to escape the scene and with only one path to choose: facing this older brother who would undoubtedly give him a beating he would never forget. Michael feels happy about his friend's recent decision, but the latter sarcastically promises that he will take care of him afterward. The students of the academy quickly gather around this pair of boys who will soon face each other, and rumors spread along with them. Some are impressed as they had never seen Ri fight, while others who had witnessed his battles dare to declare him the indisputable winner of this duel. Ri remains motionless, waiting for his opponent to make the first move. Wei uses spatial magic to retrieve a golden staff that he should use soon. Ri doesn't seem surprised by the protagonist's use of spatial magic, but he does give him credit for it. Now the older brother tests the boy by sending multiple fireballs, an intermediate-level fire element spell. Thanks to the power of the staff, Wei manages to perform the attack known as light arrow, and teleports right behind his attacker, thus evading the fireballs that were thrown at him. Ri turns around somewhat surprised by the speed of reaction his rival had, and with a smile, he acknowledges that Wei is a good student, admitting to having underestimated him. After witnessing this move, he declares that he will now battle as he should, since Wei is not an ordinary child, meaning he will attack with everything he's got. Wei widens his eyes in surprise as Ri prepares his attack. Now the older brother summons a high-speed rotating wind current in a circular form around the protagonist. Wei doesn't seem surprised at all. He already knows that spell called Vendaval, Gale, but he notices that it's much slower than his teleportation. This reassures him, and he coldly thinks that he needs to stay calm to launch his attack later. Wei closes his eyes and concentrates. He notices that Ri is summoning fire spirits and applying them to the whirlwind surrounding him, which will soon create a firestorm. The protagonist insists on calmly waiting for the exact moment to deliver his final blow. Michael's voice can be heard outside the whirlwind. He warns his friend that he should be careful because he's in the midst of an advanced fire spell called Inferno Furioso, Furious Inferno. On the other hand, Yu, Ri's younger sister, shows concern for her brother's actions, as if this spell goes wrong, it could harm him. The atmosphere becomes somewhat hostile, and the voices of the students who were previously excited about the duel now feel a bit scared due to the escalating aggression of the confrontation. Some students start to retreat from the area as they feel they could get hurt. Others distance themselves but decide to curiously observe from a distance, as confrontations like this aren't seen every day. Inside the whirlwind of fire, Ri's voice is heard as he challenges the protagonist to each launch a single attack, and the strongest one would be the victor. Undoubtedly, Ri is trying to draw out the potential that Wei refuses to show. The latter doesn't confirm nor deny, so the older brother unleashes his Inferno Furioso attack, a large wave of fire ready to crash into the protagonist's body. Wei observes thoughtfully and studiously the magnitude of his superior's attack, and he soon realizes that he won't be able to do anything to withstand that amount of energy approaching him. So, he decides to turn to the uncle and aunt of the light spirits, hoping that with their spiritual assistance, he can endure Ri's attack. The protagonist never imagined that the power gap between him and his adversary would be so vast, but now not only did he know it, but he also understood that he wouldn't be able to withstand the attack much longer. Ri materializes a few meters away from him, wearing a confident smile, and tells Wei that now he will have to endure his true strength. He then makes a motion with his arm as if pushing something with the palm of his hand while commanding the fire elements to explode and ignite everything in their path. The flames intensify and gain enough power to break through the protective light shield that the protagonist was invoking, which was guarding him against his rival's attack. As the shield shatters, Wei opens his eyes in surprise, as this was not the outcome he expected. Upon noticing this, Ri tells the protagonist that he's finished. Michael, who was attentively observing from outside, lets out a concerned groan for the health of his friend and leader, as he had been calling him since the moment he defeated him in a duel. Yu also shows concern for the well-being of the young man and orders her older brother, Ri, to stop his attack immediately, as this challenge was also beyond the legal rules of the academy. Wei remains motionless with closed eyes and a calm demeanor, as if he was waiting to receive the attack that would end his life. But that wouldn't happen as his rival undoes his attack, and the flames vanish instantly. Ri looks at his rival and tells him that he is completely disappointed, as he was hoping to meet someone who was truly worth it, and apparently, this wouldn't be the case. This causes the protagonist to open his eyes and give Ri a fleeting glance as he slowly starts to walk away from the scene. Wei tells his opponent to wait a moment, not to leave. He hasn't given up, and it was Ri who stopped the attacks, not him. So now, the boy tells him that it is his desire to continue the fight, ignoring the comments of the people surrounding them. Wei has a new strategy, and it involves summoning his magical beast Xiaojin onto the battlefield, which could now be compared to a 4th-level magical beast. His light serpent jumps into the combat area and follows its master's orders to attack his opponent. The light serpent opens its mouth wide as if preparing to devour something, but from within, a small energy ball begins to form. Once fully charged, it would collide with Ri's body and should render him unable to continue the fight. However, there was something our protagonist hadn't taken into account. His rival might also have a magical beast in his arsenal, and unfortunately for Wei, that was the case. Ri summons his magical beast onto the battlefield, named Hong Hong. It was a gigantic fire tiger that was at least 20 times larger than Wei's humble serpent. But the worst part wasn't its size but its rank. It was a level 6 magical beast. Without hesitation, Hong Hong pounces on Xiaojin, aiming to disable it before its light ray finishes charging. Wei becomes very concerned as he watches the massive fire tiger launch itself at his pet and orders Xiaojin to cease its attack and return to where he was standing. But he reacted too late. It only took one of Hong Hong's paws to stomp on the small serpent, rendering it unable to continue the fight. Wei becomes deeply worried for his pet, prompting Ri to ask his own magical beast to back off and leave his rival's magical creature alone. However, something was amiss. Hong Hong turned around to face its master but ignored his commands. It then refocused its gaze on the rival beast and, opening its jaws, spat a ball of flames to ensure that the small serpent would never rise again. Wei felt disheartened. His rival's giant tiger had now disappeared, leaving only dust in its wake. As this dust scattered in the air, Ri pleaded with his opponent to forgive what had just happened, as his magical beast had disobeyed him for the first time, and he couldn't understand why. But Wei remained silent, staring fixedly at the spot where his little light magical beast had been charging its attack to strike at Ri. Michael was not convinced at all by Ri's apologies, and from a distance, he shouted at him, calling him a ruthless bastard and stating that even though he was annoying his younger sister, there was no need to stoop to such levels and take it out on the protagonist and his poor pet. Wei continued to stay motionless as Ri explained to the redhead that it wasn't his fault since he had ordered his magical beast to retreat and leave Wei's alone. But the tiger, Hong Hong, had disobeyed him, and he didn't even understand why. Suddenly, the protagonist starts coughing repeatedly and puts a hand on his chest. Then, he faints in front of everyone. The last thing he manages to hear is his friend's voice shouting that they need help. Wei wakes up after who knows how long of lying unconscious in his bed. While he keeps his eyes closed, the figure of his magical beast Xiaojin appears countless times in his mind. He has nothing else to think about but the duel that afternoon and the demise of his little light serpent. Michael's voice can be heard a few meters away from his bed, and he sounds completely relieved to see him awake. Hai Yu, the girl of his dreams, is by his side. She came on behalf of her brother to apologize to Wei for what happened during the duel with her brother's light beast. She also explains that Xiaojin, the serpent, belonged to the growth type, while Hong Hong, the tiger, belonged to the attack type. In the nature of light beasts, it is dictated that attack-type beasts ruthlessly go after growth-type beasts, and this could be the reason why the fire tiger didn't obey its master when he asked it to return. Wei pays no attention to the girl's explanation and doesn't exchange a word with either of them. He simply requests that they return his light beast to him. Michael seems upset by this and asks him not to blame Yu for the atrocity committed by Hong Hong. She is innocent, and the true and only culprit is her older brother, Ri. After what seemed like a maneuver to get closer to the girl by the redhead, they hand the protagonist a small box that contains the lifeless body of Xiaojin, the little light serpent. Tears stream down Wei's face, revealing the emotions he's experiencing inside. Michael tries to comfort him, promising to help him acquire a much better light beast than the one that recently passed away. But the protagonist doesn't want to listen to him or anyone else. He wants to grieve in solitude, so he asks them to please leave the room. Both of them obey before things worsen. Now that Wei is completely alone, he gathers his courage and decides to open the box. However, he immediately regrets his decision. Xiaojin's small body is cold, stiff, and curled up at the bottom of the box. This completely breaks the protagonist's heart, and he bursts into tears, feeling remorse and blaming himself for what he's seeing and experiencing. All of this happened because he didn't want to end the duel when he should have. He had relied too much on his own powers, disregarding the fact that he was facing a much more advanced student. Wei had been thoughtless in sending his little magical beast into battle, knowing that his rival could also have a beast that was completely superior to his. Suddenly, a noise is heard outside his room. Someone had entered his space and was heading towards his bedroom. A bit annoyed, Wei tells the person who just entered that he doesn't want to talk to anyone and ironically repeats that he believed he had made it clear for everyone to leave. He adds that there's no need for anyone to be near him since he can take care of himself. Ignoring all his words, a familiar voice to him but not one he was accustomed to asks him how he would feel about the idea of saving his magical beast. Wei immediately opens his eyes and looks towards the door of his room. Standing in the doorway is the elderly man with Eastern features and a gray beard who had previously offered to be his teacher. He was the same person who had hidden behind the trees and observed him spending time with his pet during the previous nights. The elderly man asks Wei not to be foolish or crybaby and allows him to take a look at the box containing his magical beast, as he might be able to do something to bring it back to life. Wei is visibly excited by these words and asks if that is really possible. Without waiting for an answer, he pleads for the man to do everything possible to revive Xiaojin, no matter the method he uses. He is resigned, and at that moment, all he cares about is Xiaojin coming back to life. The elderly man kindly tells him not to worry and asks him to let him take a look. Wei expresses his gratitude and patiently waits for the elderly man to act upon Xiaojin. The old man focuses and emits a glow that appears to be a healing aura. This surprises the protagonist and partly explains why the man wanted to be his teacher. The elderly man was apparently a light mage, and he saw something in Wei to want to recruit him as his apprentice. The older man mutters and opens his eyes, fixing his gaze on Wei. Anxiously, without waiting for the verdict, Wei asks the man if he can save his light pet or not. The old man tells him both yes and no, adding that it all depends on Wei himself. Desperately, Wei asks what he needs to do. Before providing a concrete solution, the man says that he needs to ask Wei a crucial question for the resurrection of Xiaojin. The elderly man asks the protagonist if he truly loves his magical beast enough to do anything for it, even giving his own life at the cost of his own. The painful image of his serpent in the box flashes through Wei's mind, so without hesitating for a second, he affirms his answer. He is willing to give his life in exchange for the resurrection of his magical beast without hesitation. The man gives him a complex explanation, but in summary, he tells Wei that he must give half of his vitality to his dead beast. This way, the light serpent will practically become a part of his body, and Xiaojin's spirit will awaken. Wei appears somewhat confused, but there is no time for questions. He just wants to see his light beast move again. He then asks for the steps and considerations he needs to follow for the proper resurrection. Given Wei's behavior, showing genuine interest and concern for his pet, the long-bearded gray-haired man begins to explain the 3 points Wei must consider if he wants to resurrect his light beast. The first, and perhaps the easiest for Wei to fulfill, is that he will never be able to have another pet, that is, no more light beasts, for the rest of his life. The second is that since Xiaojin becomes a part of his body and shares vitality, there is a high chance that if Wei dies, his pet won't be able to continue living. So far, everything was clear and didn't worry the protagonist, who nodded and fully agreed. But the third point of this agreement made him open his eyes and hesitate for a few seconds. Sharing vitality with his pet not only meant that they would be symbolically united and that if one dies, the other would also perish, but it also meant that his own life would be cut in half to give that other half to his light beast. Wei thought about the moments he had shared with his light beast. He had been there throughout its growth and training. He missed it greatly and wished to have it with him as soon as possible. He wanted to share every possible moment with it until the end of its days. Because of this, he didn't hesitate for a second to respond to the elderly man that he was ready and willing to do what he had to do for Xiaojin. The man smiles and expresses to the protagonist that his answer was exactly what he expected to hear from him. So, without further ado, he tells him that it is time to begin the process. During a brief period that same afternoon, the elderly man explains to the boy exactly what he had to do, and sooner rather than later, they get to work. On the floor of the room where they were, the man had drawn a 6-pointed star surrounded by a circle. It magically glowed, waiting to initiate the resurrection ritual. The man instructs the protagonist to place his pet in the center of the drawing and for him to stand by its side. Now, Wei spreads his arms as if he were about to receive a hug and recites the words the elderly man had taught him. He humbly asks the great god of creation for help. He states that he will form a lifelong contract with the being in front of him, that is, with his pet. The elderly man anxiously observes the procedure, and after a few seconds of Wei falling silent, he wonders if the ritual they are performing will work, and that is what he hopes for. A brilliant light begins to emanate from Wei's chest, and it is at this moment that Wei opens his mouth for the first time after a tense moment and asks his pet if it can hear him. Xiaojin also starts to glow, and its body rises in the air as if it were levitating. The protagonist now smiles as he sees his pet slowly raising its head. He feels it within him, and this is a sign that everything went well. He then murmurs that it has been successful and fades away in the place. Wei wakes up later in a bed that is not his own and furrows his brow in confusion. But this feeling quickly passes as he feels something inside him and brings a hand to his chest, smiling and murmuring the name of his magical beast, Xiaojin. Through the door of the unfamiliar room, the elderly man who had helped him in the ritual appears. He informs Wei that he is in his house and that before thinking about getting up freely, it would be better for him to rest a bit more as his body was still tired. Wei disregards the warning and stands up to bow in gratitude to the long-bearded man. His pet was alive, and this was initially thanks to him. The elderly man now tells him not to worry about thanking him. The first thing would be for him to eat something, and he has brought him food. The protagonist takes the fried fish and devours it within seconds, unable to hide how hungry he feels at that moment. With his mouth full, he asks the elderly man how long he had been asleep after the ritual, and he responds that it had been 7 days. Wei opens his eyes in astonishment at the amount of time he had been sleeping, and the elderly man responds that it had still seemed short to him as he estimated the boy to sleep for at least 10 days. But his premature awakening was due to his level of magic. Wei understands then that the amount of hunger he feels is justified. Then a question crosses his mind that he hadn't asked until now. What was the name of this mysterious old man? The man introduces himself as Laolun, and the protagonist introduces himself as Wei, which he hadn't done either. Laolun smiles and asks again if it is now okay for him to be his student. In this way, he would train and improve his light magic and also have the opportunity to inherit his legacy. The protagonist doesn't hesitate for more than a brief moment and automatically tells him that he does want to be his student because he had noticed that his magic was not yet strong enough, and he had noticed it thanks to the ritual he had performed 7 days ago. Wei also tells him that he felt eager to become the strongest. The old man strokes his beard and tells him that he accepts him as his disciple and gives him his conditions for acceptance. The protagonist must become a legendary magister. Wei, excited, tells him that he accepts and that he will give his all to become a great magister. Laolun has one more thing to say before they each continue with their lives. He will ask Wei to take a break from school, and he will help him obtain the academy's consent. Wei reacts in surprise and asks if the academy is open to discussion. Laolun smiles with an air of confidence and confesses that he is the dean of the academy. He still holds the title of honorary vice president of the Magister Union, so it won't be a problem. A month has passed since Laolun revealed his position in the academy. Wei meets with the elderly man in the morning and informs him that his body was fully recovered and ready to begin training. His mentor is glad to hear that and says it's time to start with the lesson of the day. Laolun asks the protagonist about his magical power through meditation, but this question leaves Wei feeling downcast as he is somewhat frustrated that his magical power has not grown for a long time, and he doesn't feel that meditation is the best way to break through that barrier. The old man, far from being disappointed in his student, tells him that his magical power is that of an intermediate level mage, which is not bad. Now Laolun tells him that he has a question to ask, capturing Wei's attention, and his master begins to speak. First, he asks how much water and air a bottle can hold. To this, our protagonist responds that it strictly depends on the size of the bottle. Apparently, this answer satisfies the master, and he then asks a second question: could an identical bottle hold the same amount of water and vapor as the previous one? Wei again answers affirmatively, as it is a logical response. Laolun now poses his third and final question: what would happen if the water in one of those bottles evaporated? Would it still have the same amount? This completely perplexes Wei, who has no answer to that question. The old man takes on a wise and friendly demeanor and tells the boy to consider understanding the riddle he just gave him as part of his training depends on understanding his own magical powers. Once said, the master withdraws, wishing the young man can comprehend the game of the bottles as he did when he was young during his training. Wei sits on the floor, pensive, and tries to relate the paradox of the bottles to magic. After a while, he believes he has found the answer. According to his understanding, he is the bottle in the example, and his magical power is what evaporates. So what he must achieve is to condense that vapor so that when it becomes liquid again, it can fit more into the bottle, that is, into himself. Now that he understands it, or at least that's what he believes, he decides to start meditating. But as the minutes pass, he realizes that his power cannot or does not want to be compressed, making his training more challenging. Wei didn't give up and continued with his training, wishing to be able to complete it. Thanks to his concentration, he manages to connect with his ancestors, such as his uncles and aunts, and pleads for their assistance. The ancestral spirits join forces to help him. This brings joy to the protagonist, who becomes convinced that he has succeeded in his training. Now it's time to take a nap. Wei recounts that while he was asleep, the space he had created within himself after successfully condensing his power was filled with new spirits of light, as had happened every time one of his training sessions proved satisfactory. In other words, his power increased. The next day, the protagonist wakes up to find his master visiting his room. Laolun appears slightly annoyed. Several questions cross his mind, one of them being how Wei managed to decipher the paradox of the bottles and apply it to his training so quickly. Laolun begins to realize that this boy may be unique, that he could surpass him with time, and that there clearly is no one else like him on the entire continent. The old man approaches his student and observes him intently, noticing a change in him. He then tells Wei to look in the mirror. Upon doing so, Wei sees a slightly more adolescent face in his reflection. This leaves him perplexed. although it's enough for him to say that he now looks more handsome. His master explains that this is due to his successful compression of his magical power, with the spirits of light making changes to his body and aiding in its development. He also confesses that Wei is the youngest student he has ever had and that he has reached such a level so quickly. All this spontaneous growth sparks curiosity in the protagonist, who seeks an explanation from his mentor as to why his ability is growing so rapidly. Lao Lun tells him that apparently, the spirits of light have begun to recognize him. Wei now asks for an estimated time frame to fully compress the power of the spirits of light. The enigmatic old man tells him that it will all depend on the amount of time he takes to comprehend it, and once he does, the process will start to accelerate. So, if he strives hard enough, he should finish within 30 days or less. Next, the old man informs Wei of his new objective. The first requirement is that before the month ends, Wei must succeed in compressing his magical power. Once achieved, he should return to classes but never reveal what he knows to the rest of the students. Furthermore, once his magical power is fully compressed, it will be time to learn specific magical applications that he should be able to control to handle the competition. Having said that, Lao Lun proclaims himself a genius in the practice of magic and teaching. But in a comedic fashion, Wei interrupts, saying that the true genius is actually himself. This slightly impatiences his master, who firmly reminds him that if it weren't for his help and dedication, Wei wouldn't be in the position he is today. The master also threatens to teach him at such an accelerated pace that he would never be able to comprehend everything. Wei apologizes to him and acknowledges that his teachings are excellent. Now the old man leaves the place and instructs Wei to meditate. Now, Wei's daily routine consisted of condensing his energy to work in conjunction with the spirits of light and increase his magical power. He only stopped for bathroom breaks. As the days passed, the spirits of light had successfully compressed themselves completely, and the protagonist had reached the desired breaking point. The ball of light was solid, and his power had grown. Being the bottle, he had managed to transform the vapor into water. Now, he set himself the goal of attracting more spirits of light to continue increasing his power, but he couldn't achieve it. On the other hand, Xiaojin, his pet, had awakened from a deep sleep. The number of spirits of light attracted by the protagonist into his body had disrupted her deep slumber, and now the beast fed on them. By feeding on them, it allowed Wei to attract more spirits and continue increasing his strength. Now he heads to his master to inform him that he seems to have achieved his goal. The old man then asks how he feels with this change, to which the protagonist explains that his magical power has compressed into a golden ball within him, but he is unsure if that is good or not. Lao Lun tells him not to worry, as that golden orb is the culmination of his magical power and will serve him in the study of magic. Wei feels satisfied with the result and asks his mentor if he can now be considered a genius. But once again, his mentor responds angrily that he is not, and that he still has a long way to go. There is still much to learn. The protagonist nods and listens to his new lesson. Lao Lun explains that there are 6 magic orbs for each mage, and in Wei's case, the color of his orb is golden since it comes from light magic. Now his mission was to turn his golden orb into a more transparent hue. After this, Wei asks his mentor about the quantity and color he possesses, to which Lao Lun confesses to having only one magic orb, and it is transparent golden. He then informs him that only the greatest and most legendary mages manage to obtain the 6 transparent golden orbs. And this is what the mentor expects from his disciple. The protagonist feels excited by what he hears and assures Lao Lun that he can be certain he will achieve it. Then his master indicates that he should rest today and that tomorrow they will have a new lesson. After that, he will return to his regular classes with the rest of his classmates, and he can definitively prepare for the final exams. During the night, Wei wakes up and is surprised by what he sees. A large, bright white serpent, 3 times his height, is standing in front of him with its eyes fixed on the protagonist. He feels somewhat intimidated and asks who it is. The serpent tells him that it is Xiaojin, his light beast. It looks different, not just because of its size, but also more mature, just like Wei. Xiaojin is surprised, asking how Wei doesn't recognize her. Wei is astonished since now his supposed light beast can speak perfectly and in his own language. He asks why she has grown so much, and she responds that since the moment Wei promised during the ritual that their lives would be connected, any growth in his magical power would directly impact his pet as well. Therefore, all the training Wei had been undergoing in recent days had also been affecting his light beast. The young mage embraces his serpent and happily tells her that he is glad to see her well, and he will be happy as long as she is. He apologizes for forcing her to face Hong Hong in the past. The night passes without any further incidents. The next morning, Lao Lun meets with Wei to begin practicing. He informs him that they only have the next 7 days to learn useful magic, so he intends to make the most of every moment seriously. To start, his master tells him that he needs to know how much the boy knows about advanced magic theory and if he knows how to use magic of his level. Wei responds that he believed all magic is invoked in the same way regardless of the level, but that was a mistake. Lao Lun demonstrates his power. With just a stretch of his arm, a gust of wind generated by the movement hits a rock on the ground, breaking it into 2. Our protagonist protagonist is extremely surprised by what he had just witnessed and asks his mentor how it was possible to break a rock with a simple hand movement. The old man explains that what he had just seen was the pinnacle of ordinary magic, achieved through his deep understanding of magic, meaning that by merely thinking about what he wanted to do, he could accomplish it. Wei is amazed by his master's immense power and, at the same time, a little frightened by it. He thinks that it's best not to anger him in the future if he didn't want to have a hard time. Laolun tells his student that for the time being, he only knows a few advanced attack spells, but what is really important at the moment is for him to learn defensive magic. Later on, they would also start practicing elemental control. Now, they should focus on perfecting the first spell. And so, the practice of the Dean of the Chain and our protagonist began. 7 days later, Wei returns to the academy. His teacher welcomes him warmly and stands him in front of the class to show all the students that he's back. Of course, his friend Michael is the happiest, waving his arm and shouting, "Boss," at him. Once the protagonist reaches his seat, Hua suddenly appears behind him and whispers in his ear that she had heard a rumor about him becoming the disciple of the Dean of the Academy, which is what had kept him absent for so long. She also mentions that she had been chosen as the disciple of the Vice Dean. Wei turns around and congratulates his friend with a smile, to which Michael, with a somewhat arrogant attitude, tells him that they both are the pride of the academy. Suddenly, the teacher interrupts their conversation, announcing that she will now explain the rules of the final course exam. The first rule states that the use of the students' magical beasts is prohibited. The second rule indicates that the top 100 students, the best of them, will have their well-deserved vacation, while the next 100 must stay and study at the academy while the others rest. The third rule states that the matchups will be determined by a draw. Rule number 4 states that the students will be grouped into teams of 10 and will have 9 duels, with the top 5 from each group advancing. The fifth rule deals with how to win or lose the duels, knocking out or weakening the opponent, pushing them out of the combat arena, or causing them to surrender or reasons for victory. In case of a tie within the regulated time, a referee will decide the fair winner. The penultimate rule, number 6, suggests that if a challenger succeeds, they will be able to skip 1 year of school. And finally, the 7th rule concerns the rewards and states that the champions will receive 100 diamond coins as a prize, while the runners-up will receive half of that. The teacher also clarifies some details, such as if the losers challenge the champions or runners-up and manage to defeat them, they will receive double the reward. Finally, she informs the students that 5th and 6th year students who become champions will be able to automatically enter the Royal Academy of Advanced Magic. Also, in case a student from lower years challenges these champions and wins, they will enjoy the same benefits as them. Once the explanation of the rules and prizes of the final magic exam is finished, the teacher announces that the class is over and they can leave the classroom. In Wei's mind, there is only one thought: to win this championship at all costs to surprise his mother and father when he returns home. Michael and Wei leave the classroom and, as they walk through a corridor of the academy, they are approached by an older student. He approaches shouting the protagonist's name to get his attention. Once he is close enough, he informs Wei that since the moment he battled with heir and managed to endure so much on the battlefield, he has gained the admiration of all the second-year students. This person also tells Wei that he is eager to have a fair match with him. Once all of this is said, the young man bids farewell to our two beloved characters, greeting them politely, and says that he will wait for the protagonist in the arena. Both of them stand there, looking at him and wondering if they know him from somewhere, but neither of them remembers him from any specific place. Curiously, Michael asks his friend what the true intentions of this boy might be, and Wei responds that he honestly didn't know, but they should be cautious because he was very powerful. After the break and lunch, Michael meets with the protagonist again and tries to convince him to tell him what the dean had taught him so far. But Wei respects the promise he made to his master and tells his friend that he unfortunately can't talk about it because it's a secret. As they continue walking through the academy courtyard, they come across Ri and Yu, who slowly approach their location after the girl spots the protagonist and tells her brother to greet him. When they face each other, Ri speaks up and apologizes to Wei for what happened with his magical beast during their confrontation. She confesses that it was something she had always wanted to do but hadn't had the chance since she hadn't seen him in person until that moment. She also congratulates him, noticing some improvement in him. Wei lowers his head and listens to the apologies but doesn't respond. Once the older student falls silent, the protagonist walks past him and continues walking as if there was no one there. Then he abruptly stops and, in a threatening tone, tells him that he will see him in the arena later, and this time he won't lose to him. Ri doesn't seem surprised by the protagonist's anger and simply observes him as he walks away. A few meters ahead, Michael congratulates Wei for his serious and decisive attitude towards Ri. Then he says he feels very tired and that he has eaten enough to be full, so he decides to go to sleep. As night falls, Wei is sitting on his bed with his eyes closed, meditating to concentrate his power. All the students in the room are doing the same. There isn't anyone who doesn't want to prepare for the final exam in the best possible way. Suddenly, a voice echoes in the protagonist's head, and he immediately recognizes it. It's his teacher, Laolun, calling him, indicating that he should approach him. He is outside his room, specifically on the school field. Upon leaving his room and heading to the field, Wei is pleased to meet his teacher, so he hesitantly asks him why he was looking for him. Lao Lun doesn't answer his question and, without saying a word, begins to touch the young man in search of something that could be hidden in his clothes. The elder eventually tells him that he disagrees with his way of dressing, so he leads him to his office. Once they arrive, they both stand in front of the older man's wardrobe, and he takes out a white cape with beautiful aesthetic details from inside. Lao Lun tells the protagonist that it is his favorite cape and that he inherited it from his own master, and now he is passing it on to his disciple. Wei opens his eyes in astonishment. He really liked the garment he was being given, but he was unsure if the size would be right. At his teacher's request, he tries on the garment. After putting it on, he realizes that it fits him perfectly. It turns out to be a magical cape with the property of adapting to the body of whoever wears it. Another significant detail is that before buttoning it, the buttons appear as two magical stones, and when they are fastened, they become one that shines brightly. Lao Lun watches his student turn and admire himself in his new cape. It is clear that he likes it a lot. However, in his mind, there is only room for one thought, and that is that he must pass the exam successfully. That is the reason why they are gathered at that moment, to discuss it. In the afternoon, the groups and numbers for the exam are drawn. Our protagonist is selected in group 11, and he is number 4. As he processes this information, his friend Michael appears on the scene, but before he can say anything, he notices Wei's new clothes. The redhead's eyes begin to sparkle, and he showers Wei's cape with praise. Michael couldn't hide his interest in how much he liked the protagonist's magical cape, so he asks him where he got it from. Wei responds that his teacher Lao Lun gave it to him as a gift, and this drives Michael crazy as hope grows inside him that his own teacher will do the same for him. This leads him to run as fast as possible towards his teacher's quarters to check if there is a magical cape for him. Before leaving, he promises to return in time to wish the protagonist luck with his exam. Moments later, through the loudspeakers, the call for the students who were about to face each other in the final tests begins to be heard. Wei approaches the platform where he will measure his strength against another student. His opponent was already waiting for him there. The opponent introduces himself as Feng Yang, a wind element mage from Class B. The protagonist also introduces himself, and then the announcer indicates that it is time to start the duel. Feng Yang takes the initiative by summoning the free winds and ordering them to transform into a violent tornado. Wei adopts a much more serious attitude, one that he rarely shows. He takes his magic scepter and before unleashing his first attack, he tells himself that if that was all his opponent's power, he wouldn't take long to win the duel, and he was right. The protagonist begins with a defensive space magic and opens a portal on one side of his opponent's tornado. Then he causes that portal to completely absorb the giant whirlwind that was approaching him violently. The spectators and even his opponent were astonished by the demonstration of the boy's control over spatial magic. Once the wind spell was no longer present on the battlefield, Feng Yang surrenders to the protagonist with a defeated air. Wei asks him if he still wants to continue the battle, but he receives a resounding no as an answer. Feng Yang surrenders, making Wei the winner. But before leaving, his rival tells him that he won this time, but he will meet him again someday and defeat him. During the afternoon, Wei faced several opponents, but none of them managed to have an evenly matched duel with him. He disqualified all of them with just one attack. Now it was time to face the last remaining participant from his group. His final battle would be against a somewhat disheveled young man with messy gray hair and pronounced dark circles. His appearance caused a bit of intimidation for both Wei and the onlookers. Wei approaches him timidly and introduces himself as he had done in each of his duels. But this time, the courtesy is not reciprocated, and his rival, without even mentioning his name, simply says, "Let's begin." The disheveled youth leans forward slightly and starts gathering strength in place, recharging his magical power. Wei steps back, intrigued and for safety. Once his opponent feels ready, he unleashes his energy, summoning endless flames and commanding them to burn everything in their path. The protagonist doesn't have enough time to protect himself as he would have liked, but he manages to create his characteristic light shield, and with great effort, he can withstand the fiery attack from his enigmatic rival. After seeing that his defensive maneuver is successful, the rival clenches his teeth in frustration, but he has another plan. Wei's opponent goes to extreme measures and decides to exchange his own vitality in order to multiply his magical power, using a spell that burns his life force. The spectators become concerned by what they see and hear. It's an overly extreme move for this stage of his life, as he is sacrificing his life force just to launch a more powerful attack and incapacitate the protagonist. Some of the spectators even scold him for such foolishness. However, the disheveled boy pays no heed to their advice. He knows that by sacrificing his own life, he can instantly elevate his magic to a level Z. Wei realizes that he is not afraid to risk his own life in order to perform well in the exam, so he has no choice but to get serious as well. The protagonist closes his eyes and focuses, then asks the spirits of light to lend him their great power and fill the earth with their brilliant light. These spirits grant him 2 angel-like wings to float above the platform, making it easier for him to dodge his opponent's attacks. They also surround his body with a golden sphere to repel any attacks that may harm him. The expectant students agree that this boy's power is incredible, as he demonstrates the ability to invoke level Z magic while being only a second-year student. Wei, levitating in the air, carefully observes his opponent's next attack, but the disheveled boy sighs tiredly and starts coughing as he falls to his knees on the platform. This piques Wei's curiosity because it appears that this person did not want to continue the fight and decided to surrender when he could have attacked. But just in case, with a kind heart, the protagonist asks the spirits of light to heal his opponent, while 3 other students help him off the stage and escort him directly to the infirmary, reproaching him for using such a foolish move as burning his life force. Our light mage descends from the air and, standing on solid ground, hears the competition announcer declare him the first-place finisher in the group, qualifying him for the next round. Charlie AOT, his recent rival, also secures a spot in the next round as the second-place finisher in the group. Before leaving the venue, Wei acknowledges that AOT is a person with incredible powers. The evening passes, but before the sun sets, the protagonist heads to his teacher's home. He updates Laolun on everything that happened during the entire competition. The elder reacts with anger and reproaches both AOT's actions and those of his student. He couldn't understand how the young ones freely used magic that burned their life force. In his youth, it was not like that, but the reprimand for his student was different. Wei had used level Z magic and had demonstrated great power. This could work against him, as now no one would dare to challenge him. His student justifies himself, saying that he couldn't withstand the opponent's attack and was forced to use a certain ability. But when he used it, he couldn't control his immature light orbs. This response doesn't appease his teacher's mood, as he remains infuriated. It's the best time for Wei to leave the place. After a few days, the protagonist was among the top 4 students of his year, just as his mentor had predicted. No one dared to challenge him after witnessing his magical power demonstration. Therefore, he didn't have to exert himself at all. The other 3 students in the quartet of the year's best were his friend Michael, Woke, and a young water mage. The next day, it was time to start the semifinals. The announcer on the microphone announces the 2 matchups. On one side, the young water mage will face Woke, and in the other semifinal, Michael and Wei will face each other. Our protagonist and his best friend step onto the platform. The redhead laments having to face his friend at this stage and asks for mercy from Wei. But the protagonist gives Michael hope by saying that there's always a possibility that he won't win the duel. Both agree that they will give their best as if their lives depended on this battle. The dispute begins, and Michael is the first to make a move. He summons the fire spirits and asks them to form a dragon of the same element to defeat his opponent as quickly as possible. On the other hand, Wei uses defensive light magic and, thanks to the spirits of that element, invokes a ring that halts the flames of the dragon's attack. Michael's giant dragon ceases its attack and retreats, awaiting orders from its summoner. Wei knows that Michael is a tough opponent. Now, the protagonist's friend smiles and says that he will use his final move. This surprises Wei, as he didn't expect the battle to be so short. So now, Michael presents a magical staff before his rival's eyes and the spectators. From outside the boundaries of the combat platform, a voice that Wei knows well expresses surprise upon seeing this. It was his mentor, Laolun, who had arrived in time to witness the battle, but now he appeared concerned because of Michael's staff. Laolun says it was the wrath of the fire god. From one end of the stands, the protagonist's mentor shouts at the vice dean of the academy, asking how he could have given that fire staff to Michael. That belonged to the Department of Magic Defense. The vice dean, who is also Michael's mentor, calmly responds to Laolun that he had given his student the robe of the god of light as a gift. In this way, he makes it clear that they were even. Meanwhile, on the combat platform, Wei comes to the conclusion that his current opponent's fire staff amplifies the magical power of the wielder. That seemed to work against him, but there was a way to counter it as Wei noticed something else. The pure fire energy concentrated in Michael's staff had incredible offensive power, but it lacked defensive magic to protect him. So Wei concentrates and begins to ask the light spirits for their power to face this battle. Michael notices the movement that Wei is making and hastens his attack by launching a fireball, perhaps not large in size but very powerful as all the pure energy is concentrated in it. This fireball collides with the light shield that Wei had previously invoked, and it doesn't hold up as the protagonist had hoped. It starts to crack slowly. The young light mage steps back, extending his arms to exert more force and make his shield hold a little longer, but he knows he won't be able to withstand his counterpart's attack. Before the light shield collapses, mysteriously, the stone on Wei's magical cape begins to shine brightly. Michael notices this and seems somewhat worried. Laolun also sees it and immediately reacts, shouting at his disciple to quickly pour all the excess magic into the stone. Wei obeys his master's orders and channels all the remaining power into that point of the garment. Now things begin to change. The boy's resilience seems to grow, and he slowly starts advancing, gradually countering the pure energy fireball shot by his friend's staff. Michael can't believe how the duel turns unfavorable for him within seconds. The magical forces begin to intensify, seeking to win this battle. But with so much power, suddenly, an immensely powerful explosion takes over the scene, leaving everyone blinded by its white light. When the explosion dissipates and everyone regains their sight, we see Wei standing upright and panting, but still on his feet. In front of him, Michael lies on the ground with his arms spread wide and a smile on his face, saying that despite all his effort, he lost, but he's still glad it was against his boss. Wei approaches after hearing these words and tells his friend that his progress has been tremendous, and next time, the loser could be him. Their brief conversation is interrupted by the announcer, who loudly declares that the winner of the semifinal is Zhang Gong. Immediately after the fight has ended, the protagonist's master rushes onto the platform and, alarmed, asks if he is injured. But the answer is clear to see. Then Wei tells him that he hasn't embarrassed him, and Laolun gives him a smile, affectionately calling him a brat. Now he takes him by the shoulders and tells him to accompany him home, where he will heal his wounds. The sun shines high in the sky, and it's time to start a new day for our protagonist, who is already sitting on his bed, stretching. But he doesn't get to finish what he's doing when an anxious voice tells him that he had finally woken up and that there was something to tell him. Michael had surprisingly fallen quickly in his duel that morning. Wei rubs his eyes and realizes what he's hearing, asking the young boy to repeat what he had just said. Now this young student begins to tell him a bit more in detail about the situation. It turns out that Michael that morning had faced off in a duel with the mysterious water mage who had also made it to the top 4, just like him. Right from the start of the fight, this girl used a water magic that none of the spectators had seen before, and with that spell, she managed to trap the redhead in a water bubble that rendered him unable to move. And that's how she defeated him, just like that. Wei gets off his bed, surprised by what he's hearing. It was hard for him to believe that his friend had lost so quickly in such a decisive battle. Now, this young visitor in his room entrusts the protagonist with the task of emerging victorious when he faces the water mage. Wei accepts the mission, but before doing or saying anything on his own, he heads to his mentor's house. Once there, he finds his master, who tells him that he was waiting for him because he knew that upon hearing the news of Michael's defeat, he would come running to see him. Without wasting time, Wei asks his superior for explanations. He needed to know how his friend had lost the battle, but Laolun ignores the question and instead surprisingly responds that when facing the water mage the next day, he should automatically surrender without fighting. This impresses the protagonist, who can't hide his curiosity, and he asks his master how powerful that girl could be. Laolun reveals the mage's identity to him. Her name was Shui Ying Ri, the younger sister of Hai Ri. After revealing this, Laolun begins to tell him a bit of history. Laolun explains that each family has a magical inheritance from their ancestors. The Ri family is the oldest in the kingdom they live in, Aetius. The peculiarity of this magical seal is that only a person who is a member of that family can inherit it by generation, and regardless of the strength of the user who inherits it, every time that magical seal is used, 1/3 of its power would be consumed. In other words, that magical power can only be used 3 times a day, but with those 3 times, it would be enough for the user who possesses that seal to engage in a duel. Laolun now gives a tip to his student, saying that as long as Shui Ying uses her uncertain storm, there is no possibility that any student from that academy can defeat her. He also apologizes and asks him not to think that it is something against him, but unfortunately, it is the reality. Despite this, the old man tells him that he hopes to see him victorious and that he can now leave after obtaining all that information. As the protagonist leaves his quarters, he opens a large book titled Secrets of the Female Mage. The next day, the big moment had arrived for our protagonist. It was time to face Shui Ying, who, according to rumors, would be the toughest opponent they had ever faced in their life. The announcer invites both participants to enter the dueling area. Laolun, who accompanies his student to the platform, holds him by the shoulders and asks him to please be very careful with that girl. Their opponent was already on the platform with her master behind her, waiting for the protagonist to join. Wei approaches her and observes her for a moment. The girl with blue hair was very beautiful, but there was something about her sad gaze that caught his attention. The announcer calls our protagonist for the second time, inviting him to step onto the dueling field so that they can begin. Wei greets his opponent, introducing himself as he always does with his name and surname, but all he receives from the girl is a cold, hello. Now they stood face to face, and it was time to show why they had reached that stage. But neither of them attacked, they simply observed each other respectfully, waiting for the other's move. The protagonist formulated a strategy in his mind, realizing that if he kept his distance from her, he would have a better chance to attack. Once he had analyzed this, he made the first offensive move. With almost imperceptible speed, Wei teleports behind the girl with blue hair and, once he is behind her, he extends his arms and summons a light magic attack in the form of a beam that aims directly at the water mage's body. Apparently, he didn't manage to deceive the girl, even though his move was noticeably fast. She was able to track Wei's teleportation with her eyes, so the protagonist's attack did not catch her by surprise. The mage was equally fast in summoning a water shield, which managed to block the light beam from the boy. But apparently, this was what the protagonist wanted to achieve. Now the light mage intentionally deflects his attack towards one end of the shield and, still controlling it, manages to make it bounce quickly around the platform. This disorients the girl, as no matter where she looks, beams of light quickly envelop her from all sides. The beam of light continues bouncing for a few more seconds until it finally reaches its target. Like an arrowhead, it hits near the girl's right armpit, giving Wei hope that he had managed to knock her down or at least inflict some damage with his attack. The water mage now fixes her gaze on him, but it's not the sad and innocent look she had before stepping onto the platform. Her face has transformed into one that could frighten anyone. The expression of anger is evident, and Wei's attack has only managed to annoy her. The attacker now steps back, waiting for his opponent's response. Shui Ying closes her eyes and concentrates her power. Suddenly, a mysterious golden aura begins to envelop her. This immediately unsettles Wei. He feels completely dizzy, his body trembles, and he feels like he can't withstand that horrible sensation. From outside the battle perimeter, Lao Lun stands up, looking very surprised, and says that the mage is not only capable of using the dreaded Uncertain Storm, but she can also use the Song of the Water Dragon, the second of the 3 great water abilities of the Shing family. Shui Ying stretches out her hand, which starts to be covered by something resembling a bubble in its transparent color. Once the bubble completely covers her hand, she hurls it towards the protagonist. The ball disintegrates, forming a water whirlwind that begins to batter Wei forcefully. The boy wonders if that is the power of the Uncertain Storm or not, but it matters little now because he feels that he cannot withstand that attack since his magical power has suddenly diminished drastically without any explanation. From the other end of the platform, the attractive young girl smiles with a victorious air. After this, the water gusts that were hitting the light mage start to merge with each other, forming a gigantic circle that traps him inside, rendering him unable to move. Wei knows that it's only a matter of time until he loses the duel because he is unable to gather light spirits. Suddenly, he feels something inside him that both bothers and surprises him. Xiaojin, his magical beast, awakens. Wei thinks this can't be happening because she was sealed, but he can't continue thinking because a sharp headache interrupts him and makes him scream. The scream of our protagonist is so loud that it pierces through the water circle surrounding him and can be heard from outside. Shui Ying opens her eyes in surprise because she knows very well that her Uncertain Storm attack leaves her enemies stunned, taking away all their offensive power. But this time, it wasn't the case. Apparently, her opponent was starting to defend himself. This causes her to lose concentration on the next water attack she was charging between her hands. Lao Lun, once again, is surprised, but this time it's because of his student. While he searches for an explanation for what is happening, he notices that Wei somehow manages to dissolve the water sphere surrounding him and effortlessly exits it, levitating in the air. As the remnants of the water sphere vanish, we can see Wei floating just inches above the ground, with a glowing light emanating from his forehead, as if he had a third eye. Wei opens his eyes and murmurs the words, "Magic seal breaking," simultaneously with his master, who is several meters away. While everyone present is impressed by the extraordinary battle unfolding before them, Lao Lun explains that the ability his disciple is using can only be activated by individuals of the dragon race. This race is by far the most powerful on the entire continent, and even high-ranking dragons are capable of using magic as if they were mages. Dragons are also much more intelligent than humans and not at all friendly towards them. The only way a dragon would accept a human is if they considered them as powerful as themselves, which rarely happens. Currently, there are only about 300 dragons alive in the world, each of them over 1,000 years old. Nowadays, they are almost considered a myth, and dragon sightings have not occurred for a long time. In fact, the number of humans who have witnessed dragons is scarce. Returning to the combat zone, we see Wei's levitation come to an end, and his feet touch the platform again. His eyes change from the gray and vacant tone they had moments ago to their original honey color. The protagonist says that he has regained consciousness and is determined to win the battle. Shui Ying is pale after this involuntary display from her rival, and her distraction causes her to lose sight of him. The boy teleports again at incredible speed and appears behind her. The girl manages to see him at the same time that the light mage extends his arms and pushes her off the platform, bringing the battle to an end once and for all. The body of the young water mage is thrown backwards, and she can do nothing to prevent it, as it was a very fast movement, and at the same time, she couldn't understand how her opponent had easily escaped one of her most powerful attacks. So, she ends up sitting on the ground, outside the platform. Wei looks down at the floor and feels embarrassed about the method he just used to disqualify his opponent and win the battle. He would have preferred for Shui Ying to surrender due to an excellent display of magic on his part, or at least to have been able to fight a little longer and defeat her with his magical power, as he had done in his previous duel against Michael. The announcer approaches to verify the position of each duelist, and now that he is sure the girl is completely outside the bounds of the combat field, he declares the young light mage as the winner of the fight, even though he can barely stand after using so much magical power to break Shui Ying's magic seal. Without wasting a moment, Michael jumps onto the platform and approaches his best friend, embracing him and congratulating him on his recent victory. Shui Ying had humiliated him within seconds in their duel, and now Wei, his boss as he calls him, had avenged him. As Michael jumps around, calling Wei his idol, Wei collapses in place, with only one thought in mind: sleep. As the protagonist closes his eyes, losing consciousness, he faintly hears the voice of the red-haired friend calling for help and requesting that he be urgently taken inside the building for treatment. Now we move to Wei's mind, where he is experiencing a curious dream in which he finds himself riding on the back of a creature that appears to be a giant flying serpent soaring through the night sky. However, he doesn't get to comprehend any of this, as his bodily pains are so intense and agonizing that he wakes up just as the dream is beginning. Upon opening his eyes, he finds himself in his master's room, wondering how he ended up there since he doesn't recall anything that happened. Lao Lun's voice can be heard from a distance, asking how he feels, while his footsteps draw nearer. The protagonist smiles as he sees his master enter the room and responds that he doesn't feel too bad or in pain, just tired. Afterward, he asks how he ended up there. The old man replies that he brought him to his home because he couldn't wait for him to wake up to ask him a question that he would hear shortly. Lao Lun wants to know how Wei managed to break the magic seal during the final battle. Wei looks at him with confusion and says he has no idea what the magic seal is. Lao Lun puts on his best poker face and remains silent for a moment, then asks again in a slightly less friendly tone of voice, how is it possible that he doesn't know what a magic seal is when he himself managed to break Shui Ying's seal during the battle? Wei still doesn't understand what he's talking about. Now the old man explains to his apprentice what happened, hoping to refresh his memory and get a better response from him. When Wei was trapped by Shui Ying's uncertain storm, a kind of bright halo appeared above his head and managed to break the magic seal that was preventing him from moving freely and would soon render him unable to fight. That glow broke the magic seal of that attack and put him back on the platform as if nothing had happened. Only dragons of high rank can use that magic seal breaking ability. Wei sits on the bed, determined, and says that he's starting to remember part of what happened. He recalls the glow on his head and how he escaped from the water mage's spell, but nothing more than that. He then asks his master if that is really important to remember, and Lao Lun replies, yes, absolutely. Apparently, this conversation was not leading anywhere, so the old man decides to ask the protagonist a more direct question and says if he has ever made a pact with a dragon or a member of their clan. Wei says no, that he had never encountered a dragon before and that Xiaojin had always been his only pet. Lao Lun ponders for a moment after hearing the name of the boy's pet. Then he turns and fixes his eyes on Xiaojin, asking, with a touch of mystery, what if his pet turned out to be a dragon and not a serpent? Xiaojin lifts its head upon hearing its name and looks at the humans curiously. Then the master receives the question from his student, who asks if there's a possibility that his light beast is actually a dragon. Lao Lun thinks for a moment and responds that as far as he knows, dragons have 4 legs, or at least 2, and they also have claws. However, he cannot confirm this since he only relies on hearsay and has never been in the presence of a dragon. Wei is excited and a little confused by his mentor's words as Lao Lun retreats to the adjacent room. Lao Lun suggests a bit of patience as he plans to search for the book with information about dragons to clear up some doubts that have arisen after a long time without rereading it. After a few moments, he returns to his disciple with a book in hand titled, The True Kings of the Dragons of the Continent. He opens it and begins flipping through the pages in search of a particular one. Upon finding it and reading it, he fixes his gaze on the protagonist of this story and tells him that if what the book shows is real, he may have found a true treasure. Wei stretches his neck to read the same thing his master is reading. The page in the book reads as follows. The golden dragon with 5 claws is known as the King of Dragons, or also as the Dragon God. Its lifespan is around 20,000 years, but at 15,000 years, it begins to search for the most beautiful female dragon to mate with, and she will then gestate the next generation of the dragon for 1,000 years. This offspring would be the heir to the Dragon God after spending 3,000 years growing and developing until they are ready to take their father's place, who will retire and move on to a better life. In this way, there will only be 1 dragon per generation suitable to assume the position of the king. After finishing reading this page of the book, the protagonist asks hopefully if it is possible that Xiaojin is the heir of the Dragon God. Lao Lun doesn't have the answer to that question, but he tells Wei that if it were the case, they would have to wait for about 3,000 years to find out, and by that time, both of them would likely be dust. But the book also stated that dragons took around 600 years to reach the juvenile phase. However, in Xiaojin's case, in just 1 year, it had almost completed its childhood stage and was entering the growth phase. After saying this, Lao Lun realizes that it was highly likely that by making a contract and sharing his life with his pet, Wei unintentionally accelerated its growth. Coincidentally, since that moment, Xiaojin had not stopped growing and absorbing magic indiscriminately. To conclude the conversation, the old man tells his apprentice that when Xiaojin enters the growth stage, it will grow legs and claws that will be very useful for self-defense, and at that time, he won't have to fear dueling with others. Indeed, the protagonist had found a treasure. Wei stands up on his bed and raises his arms in celebration, shouting excitedly that his pet is a dragon. But as a party pooper, his master interrupts his celebration, telling him that he shouldn't rejoice so much because the book said something else that he must know. So Wei puts his celebration on hold and pays attention to what the old man has to say. It turns out that on the last page of the book, there was a map and instructions on how to reach that distant land where dragons ruled. Therefore, it was Wei's responsibility to go there to meet the Dragon King and his wife, and then find out if they wanted to reclaim their child. If the latter was the case, Wei would have to leave the magical beast in their kingdom and depart from the place. The protagonist clearly disagreed with this measure and asked his master if he really had to give Xiaojin back. Laolun responded that he must understand how painful it must be for parents to lose their child. Then he left. Wei turns and gazes at his magical beast, proud to know that it is a dragon. They got along very well, and their lives were happy, but the protagonist was not a selfish person and put himself in his own parents' shoes. How would they feel if he were to disappear? After a moment of reflection, he tells Xiaojin that once he graduates, they will embark on a journey to the land ruled by dragons, and he will do everything possible to convince the dragon god to let Xiaojin stay with him for the rest of its life. Now the protagonist lies back down to rest his exhausted body a little longer. While generating a small ball of light energy in his hand, he thinks that in just 2 days, his first master, Shu, would come to the academy to pick him up and take him to the village with his family. Wei eagerly awaits his master, expecting to surprise him greatly with how much he has progressed and increased his light magic and spatial magic powers. The memory of his parents is also in his mind, wondering if they miss him. He certainly misses them a lot. 2 days later, what the protagonist had been waiting for happens. As he leaves the academy, his beloved master Shu is standing in front of him. He had come to pick him up and take him to his home with his mother and father. Wei runs excitedly into his arms, saying it's a pleasure to see him and thanking him for coming. While they walk together, Wei asks Shu if he had any news about his parents. His master responds that before coming for him, he had visited his parents' house, and both of them were doing well, thankfully, and eager to see him again. This delights Wei, who wasn't expecting any news other than that. Now it's Shu who asks a question, wanting to know how his best student was doing at the academy. Wei confesses that he had been promoted to the 2nd year and tells him all about his best friend, the red-haired Michael. He also brings him up to date in great detail about everything he had experienced recently as they venture together into a forest on their way home. They laughed and caught up on everything they had to share. But after walking for a while, deep into the thickets, they are ambushed by a group of muscular bandits with large sabers that would frighten anyone. Shu asks the boy to wait a moment as he will be the first to advance towards the place and try to negotiate with the ruffians or at least find out what they wanted. When Shu is close enough, he challengingly asks the wrongdoers what is going on, and they respond with a threatening tone that they are extremely bored and want to have some fun with a woman. This is an obvious taunt to the elder light mage, who is not at all offended and ignores the comment. Now one of the thieves says that they will only let them leave if they hand over all the money they have. Shu cordially accepts and takes out a simple coin from his pocket, placing it in the man's hand. The bandit who had taken the coin from the instructor seems to become enraged and throws it to the ground in a gesture of annoyance. He then looks at Shu and repeats his demand to give him everything he has, as he considers a single coin to be a mockery. If he doesn't obey, he will have to deal with him and all his brothers who are eagerly waiting behind him, ready to attack. Shu calmly asks him to wait a moment as he goes to get more coins. He then turns and walks towards where his apprentice was waiting for him. When he reaches him, Wei asks what is happening with those individuals. The master tells him not to worry, as they are just simple thieves with magic power far below his own. So he invites Wei to face them alone, in what would be his first real fight outside the academy's training grounds. At first, the protagonist doesn't agree with this idea and questions his superior's decision, asking if it is really necessary for him to do it. Shu responds affirmatively, explaining that through his confrontations, his magic would grow. It was a form of training. Shu promises to watch his back from a distance. Wei remains hesitant but feels a push on his back that propels him directly towards where the bad men are. Now the protagonist is facing a hostile group of armed men. Wei, feeling very nervous, greets them and tells them that as they can see, they have no more money to give, so he kindly asks if they would let them go. The leader of the bandits yells at him to shut up and raises his arm to strike the boy in the face. Swiftly and unnoticed, the protagonist takes a 3-meter step backward, easily evading the attack. This leaves the bandit perplexed, who alerts the group that they are facing a true mage and that the best strategy in this case would be for everyone to attack him at once. So they all rush towards the boy. Wei has only a few seconds to make a decision on how to act, so he chooses to fight against the group. As usual, he politely summons the light spirits that grant him his elemental power to create the same spell he had used to attack the water mother 3 days ago, the arrow of light. While the arrow bounces through the forest grass, seeking a target to hit, the wrongdoers begin to move away, trying to avoid the attack without knowing that whatever they do would be in vain. The protagonist's light magic has a dual effect. Firstly, it partially blinds the enemies, rendering them unable to see and defend themselves against the spell. And secondly, the arrow's tip sends them flying through the air. The protagonist is completely surprised by how easy it had been to emerge victorious from that fight, his first real fight against bad guys. He then returns to Shu seeking his approval. Now his master is astonished by his abilities and asks him what magic he had used. The boy responds that it was called Light Division, and confesses that it was his most powerful magic to date. Shu tells him that it wasn't necessary to use his strongest magic against a simple group of bandits, but he understands it because the boy had been very scared since it was a real fight. Shu also supports this reaction, as ultimately the group of people were bad and deserved to encounter someone who puts them in their place. His master congratulates him, noting that his magical powers had grown significantly. With the path cleared, they continue on their way to Wei's home. Upon arriving, to the protagonist's surprise, his mother is waiting for him with a smile in the garden of their home, and as soon as she notices him in the distance, she calls out his name. Wei can't hide the excitement he feels. His tears are evidence of this emotion. He runs to embrace her, and as they come together, they express how much they missed each other during this academic period of the protagonist. Now another voice congratulates him for achieving first place in the final exam. When he turns around, Wei sees his father standing behind him, which obviously brings him great joy. The family embraces and aligns, demonstrating the unity they have always had. Together, they walk into their home, where, according to the protagonist's mother, his favorite meals are waiting for him. On the other hand, his father says that after eating, he would love to hear about all the adventures his son has experienced during his absence from home. Wei enjoys the well-deserved rest from the magical world as he deserves, but he knows that after enjoying this family gathering, a new journey to the land of the dragons awaits him. And that's how the second part of this manhwa ends. If you have reached this part of the video, let me tell you that you have been one of the few people to make it here. So comment the word light in the comments. Remember to subscribe to not miss any videos. With that said, see you in the next video.